This is what the original Jurassic Park Dilophosaurus scene looks like, and this is what it would look like if it were done today with our modern understanding of dinosaurs. At the time, these were the most scientifically accurate dinosaurs we had ever seen on screen, with the filmmakers taking care to push forward new ideas and discoveries that have since become commonplace.
My kid would say, "Where does the poo-poo come from, Daddy?"
Their horizontal stance, their relationship to birds, and dinosaurs as intelligent, warm-blooded, and very capable animals were all concepts this movie introduced to the general public, forever changing the public perception of dinosaurs from slow, dim-witted, cold-blooded creatures and into the fascinating animals of our greatest dreams and nightmares. But it also gave us this: a likely contender for the most inaccurate depiction of any dinosaur in cinematic history, even for the time, which matters, as Jurassic Park continues to shape the public perception of dinosaurs. Now look, the franchise is a built-in defense against scientific accuracy, since in-universe, these are meant to be genetically engineered imperfect clones, with the gaps in their genome filled in with frog DNA. And in the novels, it's even more overt. But at least with the first three movies, the filmmakers were largely trying to depict these animals as accurately as science and cinema would allow. They spoke to paleontologists, examined the fossil evidence, and Michael Crichton, the author of the novel and himself a graduate of Harvard Medical School, intensively researched paleontology. That's exactly why the Dilophosaurus stands out so much. Unlike the other dinosaurs in the movie, which featured more surface-level inaccuracies, they took so many liberties with Dilophosaurus that if it were swapped out for an accurate version, the scene wouldn't work. So instead, I've gone ahead, made a scientifically accurate Dilophosaurus, and recreated the iconic Nedry scene from scratch. And how'd I do this, you ask? With the power of self-belief, aka 3D modeling. But before I can start, I need an answer to the proverbial question: what is so inaccurate about this Dilophosaurus? Well, there are three big things that the movie got wrong. First of all, it's way too small. The dinosaur seen in the film is only about 4 feet tall and 11 feet long. The real animal was roughly twice this size, and was not only an imposing carnivore, but also the apex predator of its ecosystem. You see, Dilophosaurus was essentially the T-Rex of the early Jurassic, the biggest and baddest guy around. Now, while some may defend the size by claiming it was meant to be a juvenile, which is what the filmmakers did retroactively, its smaller stature was simply meant to help differentiate it from the other dinosaurs in the film. And its unaltered use in the sequels pretty much cemented it as its final in-universe size. Secondly, and thirdly, arguably the movie's most memorable traits, the neck frill and its ability to spit venom, were complete fabrications by Michael Crichton, and were not present in the real animal, and likely in no dinosaurs at all. But how can we really know that? If we don't even know what its crest actually looks like, how can we really rule out these features or something similar? Well, let's start with the frill. If you look at the skeleton of a frilled lizard, the animal that inspired this feature, you'll see that the frill isn't just random loose skin. Instead, you will see specialized hyoid bones and connective tissue in the throat. It's a mechanical apparatus rooted in its skeletal anatomy. And in dinosaurs, for a structure as big as the one in the movie, we'd expect to find some type of anatomical clue in at least one member of the species. And we simply don't. Then there's the venom. In spitting cobras, venom doesn't just shoot out randomly. It is produced in venom glands rooted in its skull, travels through ducts in its head, and exits through specialized openings in the fangs. In other words, spitting venom requires a very specific delivery system. And once again, in dinosaurs, we simply don't see evidence for that system. The closest we've ever come is Tyrannosaurus, a small feathered dromaeosaur that was thought to be venomous, as some of its teeth resembled those of venomous snakes. But upon closer inspection, those findings were heavily criticized and seem to have been mistaken or misinterpreted. So currently there is no compelling evidence that any non-avian dinosaur was venomous. But beyond the lack of fossil evidence, there's an even simpler reason as to why Dilophosaurus probably didn't need either of these features. They would be addressing problems the animal had already solved. Survival in the wild relies on design efficiency, so animals don't want two things doing the job of one. Why was T-Rex unable to become a piano virtuoso? Because its arms were too short. Why were its arms so short? Because it didn't need them with such a powerful bite force. And the giant neck frill is a display structure, but Dilophosaurus already had a major display structure in its crest. That is literally where its name comes from. So why would it need to spend time and energy developing and sporting another one? And venom is often most useful for animals that need chemical help subduing their prey. But Dilophosaurus was not a helpless little trickster. It was a big, fast, and powerful predator with sharp teeth and huge claws. It really had no need for venom. So at this point, we know what Dilophosaurus wasn't. But before we reveal what the real animal looks like, let's take a quick trip to a place even scarier than Jurassic Park, trying to book a doctor's appointment. Now guys, sometimes getting to a doctor can get quite complicated. But honestly, the hard part usually isn't deciding to finally see a doctor. It's finding the right one, making sure they take your insurance, checking reviews, and actually getting an appointment booked. That's where ZocDoc, today's video sponsor, comes in. As someone who recently moved cities, finding a new doctor was one of those things I kept putting off. My excuse was always, I'll deal with it after the next video, which, as you can imagine, is a terrible system. But with ZocDoc, you can search and compare local in-network doctors. They have more than 150,000 providers across more than 200 specialties in all 50 states, with detailed doctor profiles and reviews from real patients, so you can choose based on what matters to you. And you can also see actual appointment openings and click to instantly book a visit. A lot of appointments happen fast, and sometimes you can even find one on the same day.
So whether you move somewhere new, you've been putting off an appointment, or you just don't want to spend your afternoon calling offices,
ZocDoc is free to use and makes taking care of your health way easier. And because I'm in Canada, I don't have ZocDoc here, so I had to do it the annoying way, which is exactly why ZocDoc is so useful for viewers in the US. It puts all of that into one place. So head to ZocDoc.com/filmtour to get that appointment off your to-do list. And if you're currently trapped on a dinosaur island, maybe book something with a very flexible cancellation policy. Alright, back to the dinosaurs. So if not this, what did an accurate Dilophosaurus actually look like? Well, to answer that, it was time for Blender. Nope, not that Blender, the 3D one. And the first thing I needed was an accurate look at its anatomy. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a 3D scan for download. So I went for the next best thing, skeletal drawings. I brought them into Blender, sized them appropriately, and started sculpting. This is where I craft the shapes and forms of the creature and take special care to follow the proportions and anatomy of the fossils. As always, it's my favorite part of the whole process. Once I was happy with the base sculpt, I could bring it into ZBrush, increase the polygon count, and add as much detail as possible. Most likely, just like T-Rex, its scales were much smaller than the oversized scales we usually see in media. And this goes for dinosaurs in general, because from a distance, many of them likely would have looked completely smooth. With that, I had my finished high detail sculpt. And then came the fun part, color. So, what color should our Dilophosaurus be? Well, as with most dinosaurs, we have no direct evidence for what color Dilophosaurus actually was. So instead, we have to look at living relatives, modern analogs, and the little fossil color evidence we do have from other dinosaurs. But if we first look at Dilophosaurus in the movie, this is clearly what the amazing artists at Stan Winston's studio did as well. They seem to have drawn heavy inspiration from animals like the frilled lizard and its relatives, which are not terrible ecological analogs for something like Dilophosaurus, and in turn created something that feels entirely plausible. However, when it comes to a real theropod, I prefer to look at larger reptiles like monitor lizards as a starting point, since they're a better ecological analog for a big terrestrial predator. And what we mostly see are shades of tan, brown, black, and other more grounded natural colors. And some of the best fossilized evidence of color we have from other dinosaurs shows features like stripes and body patterning, which to me makes a lot of sense for predatory animals in general. So this is why I added to my model. But what about its most distinctive feature? Its crests. Well, now we come to answer one of the most highly debated issues when it comes to Dilophosaurus. What were its crests for? And by extension, were they brightly colored? Well, let's start with the first question. The truth is, all we know is that it had crests. They weren't weapons or armor. They were structures for visual display sitting right on top of their skulls, and were likely covered in keratin, the stuff your nails are made of. But we simply haven't found one that is complete, so we don't know their full shape, size, or color. Now, one common idea is that the crest may have been large and brightly colored for mate display, similar to what we see in some birds, and that's completely possible. But I think there are a few problems with treating that as the obvious answer. First, we just don't have much to draw from, especially regarding whether males and females had sexually dimorphic crests, something we'd expect if their primary purpose was sexual display. Second, if you look at modern predatory birds and crocodilians, their closest living relatives, males and females, look almost identical, and we don't really see anything directly comparable to the giant twin crest of Dilophosaurus, which creates a problem. We don't really have a perfect modern analog. So instead, I looked at something like a cassowary. Now obviously a cassowary is not a predatory dinosaur, but it is a large bird-like animal with a prominent head structure. And scientists suggest that its casque, which means helmet, which is funny, may be involved in things like display, sound, heat regulation, or protection. In other words, it may not be just one thing. But considering the males and females look almost identical and their crests are not brightly colored, the role in sexual selection is likely very limited, which to me makes the most sense for Dilophosaurus, as predatory birds and most predatory animals in general do not sport bright primary colors or large sexually dimorphic display structures, and we can expect the same from predatory dinosaurs. So I made the crest black and slightly shiny to resemble keratin, and with this we had our finished paint job. I could then bring it back into Blender, give it a skeleton, and we could move on to the second most debated topic, feathers. Now, there is no direct evidence that Dilophosaurus had feathers, and as an early theropod, it sits outside the dinosaur group where feathers are well documented. It simply comes much earlier on in the family tree. However, there is some evidence to show that feather-like filaments or protofeathers were basal to all theropods. So while I didn't want to cover it in feathers like a dromaeosaur, I also didn't want to pretend soft coverings were impossible. At the end, I chose to include a small patch of protofeathering along its back, more like sparse fuzz, and a handful of quill-like structures around its neck. I then gave it morphs to make it breathe and blink. And with this, we had our finished Dilophosaurus.
Available now.
So let's see what's changed. First, the head is larger and narrower, the body is longer, and the animal is much bigger overall. Instead of a little venom-spitting trickster, we now have something closer to what Dilophosaurus actually was. A large athletic predator that probably wouldn't want to play fetch.
Stick, stupid!
Now, as I said in the intro, the scene with Nedry, while iconic, relies heavily on the inaccuracies present in the movie's design. And when we size it up, take away the frill, and remove its venom, the scene simply doesn't work. So it's now time to remake the entire scene from scratch. And for this, the first thing I needed was a yellow raincoat. While that shipped, it took a day to draft up a rough storyboard and animatic for how I saw the new scene playing out. Now, we need to give credit where credit is due. While the design is highly fictionalized, one thing the movie absolutely gets right is the behavior. I think a really special part of the scene is that the Dilophosaurus is not just a bloodthirsty monster. It doesn't immediately sprint at Nedry and try to kill him. Instead, it's curious. It watches him, it approaches slowly, it sizes him up and tries to understand what he is. It might be somewhat desensitized to humans if he grew up in captivity, so it makes sense that it wouldn't be as skittish as a real animal might be. And that's what makes the scene work so well. The dinosaur feels like a real animal, and it's this realistic behavior that I wanted to ensure I was bringing into my new scene. But even with my finished animatic and my yellow raincoat in the mail, I was missing one key element. Not only do I not really like going outside, but I very much don't live anywhere near a rainforest. Which is why we're going to use a green screen. And the secret to a good green screen shot, at least one of the secrets, is making sure that you know exactly what's supposed to be behind you. So to do that, I opened up Unreal Engine, created a new level, and began building the environment. I added the cliff, the jeep, the forest, and most importantly, the tree. The main thing here was getting the layout of the scene correct. Once I was happy with it, I could drop in the Unreal Mannequin for framing and start adding in my cameras. This allowed me to find the right composition and figure out the lighting as if I were really on location. Then, once my yellow raincoat arrived, it was time to channel my inner Nedry. So I set up my green screen. The green screen was too short, so I Dr. Pepper and just a random trash can. So I really hope it doesn't just like collapse on me. And I made sure to match the framing and lighting as closely as possible to my 3D animatic. This allowed me to save through the shots and be confident that what I was filming would actually work once it was placed into the scene. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the Jeep from the movie, which means I also don't have the cable rod it comes with. So I had to make do with an old shoelace I found in my apartment. And thankfully, I saved the most difficult shot for last. So I'm just gonna run here and then just jump on my dog's bed. Once I had all of my footage, I brought it into Premiere for editing, but I didn't need to see what the Dilophosaurus was doing, so I could edit our reactions to one another, and the one in the storyboards wasn't giving me much to work with. So it was time for animation. I reached out to my animator Iron, and he began bringing the Dilophosaurus to life. The main thing here was to avoid movements that felt too cinematic or monster-like. We tried to keep it natural and animalistic, like a real creature that was curious, unpredictable, and dangerous. Once we finished the animations, I could splice them into my edit and see how the scene was actually working. If something felt off, we could tweak it before moving into the next steps. I came myself out of the footage, brought those clips into Unreal, and placed them onto little green screen planes inside the level, which meant I could actually see myself standing in the environment. Then I brought in the Dilophosaurus, added its animations, and could start refining the framing, camera movements, and interaction between me and the dinosaur. I added a waterfall, hit the green screen planes, I could then hit render. I brought everything back into After Effects for the final composite. And because I find it easier than exporting the camera animation, I set up this weird tracking scene instead. Because sometimes the stupid solution is the one that works. Now, in the original movie, it's raining pretty heavily, but I was filming this in my apartment at 3 in the morning, so I didn't really feel like dumping a bucket of water on my head. So instead, I went with a lighter rain that could be partially blocked by the tree cover. And for this, I used After Effects Juice to find the perfect piece of stock footage and tracked it into my shots. Check out my link below if you want to try out the great plugin. After some post-processing, we had our finished visuals. But one very important thing was missing: sound. Now, according to Sound Effects Wiki, which is the funniest site I've ever discovered, the Dilophosaurus in the movie uses sounds of a swan, a howler monkey, and a rattlesnake. And honestly, I actually really like what they did, especially with these little bird-like calls. Unfortunately, none of the animals used are great candidates for what a Dilophosaurus would actually sound like. The rattlesnake makes its sound by shaking a rattle, which a Dilophosaurus very obviously did not have. A howler monkey is a mammal, which honestly should never be used as a point of reference for dinosaurs. And the swan, while technically a living dinosaur, produces most of its sound and calls using a syrinx, the specialized vocal organ of birds. But for non-avian dinosaurs like Dilophosaurus, the only evidence we have points to them having a larynx, rather than the specialized syrinx used by modern birds. So the bird-like calls of a swan probably weren't the best match. Luckily, some modern birds, like New World vultures, don't have a syrinx, and they sound horrifying. So they were perfect for our new scene. And when you pair those rough, breathy bird sounds with the hisses, growls, and throat sounds of crocodilians, you get something that feels like a much more plausible sound for a non-avian dinosaur. The last step was to add a bit of music to aid in the horror, and with that, we had our finished reconstruction. And so, without further ado, and with everything else out of the way, this is Jurassic Park with an accurate Dilophosaurus.
Well, you're not too big. Why don't you just stay there? Yeah? Why don't you just stay right there? Look, you're just a stick. Do you want to play fetch? Yeah? Fetch?
Go fetch, boy.
No? No fetch? Okay. Well, why don't you stay right there? Right? Just stay right there.
And there you have it, Jurassic Park with an accurate Dilophosaurus. No frill, no venom, just the real animal. So what do you think? Is the real version still scary, or do you prefer the spitter from the movie? Let me know down below. Thank you to SockDog for sponsoring this video. Check out my link to get started. And thank you to my channel members and Patreons, some of whom got to see the clip early. Consider becoming a member or Patreon. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe and check out this video where I made a scientifically accurate T-Rex fight.